As expected, Kamala Harris is running for president, and boy, do I have a lot to say about this. For those of you who might not know who she is, I have some details about her record as a senator from California for the past 2 years, and also from her career as a prosecutor in California for 20 years, including 6 years as Attorney General. I want to be clear about this up front. The establishment loves Kamala Harris. The corporate Democrats, the mainstream media, the big donors. She has sizable support in each of these different groups. Whether or not she is the establishment candidate that they all decide to throw their weight behind remains to be seen. That's what I personally think, but it's too early to say for sure. As I give some of these facts about her, it's going to become clear why the establishment is backing her candidacy. For about 20 years, she was a prosecutor in California. For 6 of those years, she was the Attorney General, so the top law enforcement official in the state. Already, this is something the establishment loves about her. One reason that I've heard a lot already is because since she was a prosecutor almost her entire career and her job description was to enforce the laws that were already on the books, it would be hard for the progressive base to find problematic policy positions that she supported since in theory, the job is apolitical. This school of thought comes in response to the fact that the last establishment-backed candidate, Hillary Clinton, had been actively engaged in politics for decades and racked up an unbelievably long record of horrendous votes and policy decisions. This created a night and day contrast between Bernie and Hillary Clinton. When you compare their records as well as their current policy positions, Hillary Clinton came out on the wrong side of almost every major issue. She voted yes on the Iraq War, an illegal war that killed minimum 200,000 civilians. There are some counts that over 1 million innocent civilians were killed when Bush illegally invaded Iraq. She voted for the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act basically shreds the Constitution. The Patriot Act is where the NSA gets their legal justification to spy on all Americans without a warrant. And there are certain provisions in the Patriot Act that says if the government declares you're a terrorist, they can arrest you, detain you, hold you indefinitely without a trial and without ever letting you talk to a lawyer. When she was Secretary of State, she went around the world and she was pushing fracking because she was taking money from the oil industry. So she was helping to contribute to the climate crisis in the wrong direction. She orchestrated the coup in Libya. Now Libya is a failed state and they have literal slave trades in Libya now because she and Barack Obama overthrew Gaddafi. I'm not going to get into all of that. So we could go down a list of her policy positions and she was just on the wrong side. They want to avoid repeating that same mistake at all costs, not by supporting an actual progressive with a strong progressive record. Instead, I think they'll slightly change their strategy by trying to muddy the waters. They want someone relatively new to politics whose positions aren't as public and well known in a sad attempt to pull one over on the progressives. I still think there are legitimate criticisms to be made about her time as a prosecutor and specifically as the Attorney General of California, because at that point you're the top law enforcement official in the entire state, so you have a lot of sway over what policy is. You decide what kind of cases the state prosecutors make a priority, also how aggressively they pursue them. With that said, many progressives, myself included, have a lot of concerns with what her priorities were while she was Attorney General. For years, California's been dealing with an unaffordable housing crisis. Hundreds of thousands of homeless people in the state, many of them kicked out of their homes by banks because they couldn't afford to pay their mortgages. A lot of them just aren't making enough to keep up with the cost of living in the state or in the country, period. Especially because the real estate industry in California keeps artificially raising the prices of rent. Also, you have the problem of gentrification, trying to kick out poor minority communities in order to sell to rich white people who would pay more for the same property or the same land. A lot of this, by the way, was fraud and illegal. The large financial institutions and the real estate industry are largely responsible for the housing crisis in California. It's been proven that they are systematically and illegally taking advantage of California residents. So how did the top law enforcement official in the state, Kamala Harris, address this problem? I have a well-known case that should give you an idea of who she was fighting for. Donald Trump's Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, was once the head of One West Bank. At the time, One West Bank and its subsidiaries had foreclosed on hundreds of thousands of homes in California alone. That earned Steve Mnuchin the title in the industry as the foreclosure king. He made hundreds of millions of dollars by kicking working class people out of their homes and then reselling it at higher prices. Of course, it turns out when you look into it, Steve Mnuchin and One West Bank was doing this by using illegal, fraudulent loans to rip people off, and they were defrauding their own customers. After several requests had been made to the California Attorney General's office to start an official criminal investigation into Steve Mnuchin and One West Bank, they actually did start that investigation. Lower-level prosecutors brought the evidence to Kamala Harris and told her that they probably have enough evidence to secure an indictment. Yet with all of this evidence, and even her own prosecutors recommending that Kamala Harris prosecutes the bank and Steve Mnuchin and the executives, she still declined prosecution. And it turns out when you do a little digging, she took money from One West Bank multiple times during her campaigns for California Attorney General. So if that wasn't clear enough, Trump's Treasury Secretary would likely be in prison right now if Kamala Harris didn't have this questionable relationship with One West Bank. I'm not saying 100% it's because of the donation, but seeing how that's exactly how this rigged political system works most of the time, it's definitely an open question. Again, all the reports and all the articles say her office had damning evidence, and her top prosecutors even recommended criminal prosecution. Like I said, it leaves an open question as to whether or not you can trust Kamala Harris to actually fight for progressive priorities, or just for the people in general. How can you trust it when she not only has this as part of her past, but she refuses to address it? People have been asking about this now for over 2 years. She either thinks it's a non-issue and everyone should just shut the fuck up about it, or she knows how it looks and doesn't have a believable explanation, which is also bad. But what I'm not going to do is entertain the possibility that she just hasn't heard this criticism of her yet. I just think that case about Steve Mnuchin and One West Bank is very telling about Kamala Harris's character. Within the last year, she's come out in favor of Medicare for all. You can kind of give her a little bit of credit for that because a year ago, most politicians in the country were against single payer. There's still a lot of them who are against single payer, including her fellow senator from California, Dianne Feinstein. I guess some progress is better than no progress. But I'll tell you why I'm not bouncing off the walls about her endorsement for single payer. Whether or not we should have single payer isn't debatable. It's just not up for debate. The mainstream media and the establishment would have you believe otherwise because they take money from the private health insurance companies or the pharmaceutical companies. But when you look at the data, the statistics, the reports, and all the findings, it's very clear that there's just no logical opposition to a single-payer healthcare system. It costs less than the private health insurance system that we have now. Currently, 30,000 people in the U.S. die every year because they can't afford basic healthcare costs. We have an epidemic of people not being able to afford prescription drugs in this country. 30 million people in the United States do not have any health insurance. Medical bills are the number one cause of bankruptcies in the United States, so trillions of dollars in debt because of medical bills. You can solve all these problems by moving to a single-payer healthcare system. To anyone who does the most basic, minimal level of research into the topic, you could see that. Which is why over 60% of the country wants a single-payer healthcare system, and that's including Republicans in that polling. Anyone who opposes single payer is either wildly ignorant on the topic or have some sort of financial incentive to keep the system as is. So to raise your hand and say, I would like the American people to have the same basic health care that everyone in every other modern nation in the world has, isn't a bold, trailblazing position. Furthermore, she's guilty of the same thing as Elizabeth Warren on this issue. Obviously, she's worse. It's one thing to raise your hand and say you're for it, but it's another thing to put all your blood, sweat, and tears into passing it into law. The next president of the United States has a chance to be the president that finally passed the single payer into law. This would be a game changer for the entire country and the biggest economic win for progressives since the New Deal. Come hell or high water, single payer needs to be passed into law as soon as possible. I want someone who's willing to go to the mat to get it passed into law. This issue hasn't been a priority for Kamala Harris even after she announced that she supported it. I don't know any progressive who's willing to hang all of their hopes of passing single payer into law on Kamala Harris fighting the entire political establishment tooth and nail for a progressive priority. Some more policy positions from her. She's not in favor of bank deregulation, which is a good thing. At the same time, I don't really hear her talking about adding tougher regulations to the banks, so it seems like she wants to keep the regulation as is, which is a joke, because clearly right now what we need is to reinstate all the protections that were in the New Deal and some. So bring back Glass-Steagall and all of that. And I don't know her position on enforcing antitrust laws when it comes to the big banks in this country, like Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, all too big to fail. I haven't seen any action from her or legislation on the issue of climate change. I don't even know if she supports a Green New Deal. She wants free college, but here's the kicker, for families that make less than $140,000 a year. Now, lower income people or people in the middle class or poor might hear that and say, oh, that's reasonable. But honestly, it depends where you live in the country. Some parts, that might not be enough to pay for all your bills and send all your kids to college. So I believe that we should have free public education, including college, for everybody in this country, no matter what the income is. And that's a disagreement I have with Kamala Harris because, again, she seems to be taking the neoliberal, corporate establishment, democratic approach to an issue and just doing half measures. Just do a half step. Let's just solve a little bit of the problem, but let's not go all the way. Foreign policy. She's heavily lacking in the foreign policy department. I don't think I've ever heard her mention the Iraq War or any of these other illegal wars that the U.S. is currently engaged in around the world. One positive thing for her in this area, she did vote yes to end the U.S. involvement in the genocide in Yemen. But again, that was just a yes vote. It would be hard to explain a no vote. And she just doesn't, again, Yemen is not a priority for her. I don't think I've ever heard her actually just come out and talk about Yemen and how we're actually funding and supporting and actively participating in a genocide. I almost never, and that's a very big responsibility for anybody in Congress. And I hold elected officials, especially in the Democratic Party, to task for that issue. Before doing research for this segment, I forgot that she was one of the few senators to vote against the authorization of the illegal NSA spying program, which allows them to collect everybody in the United States, phone calls, emails, text messages, internet history, all of that. So that's a very good thing because they just completely, as a result of the Patriot Act that Hillary Clinton voted for, they have shredded the Constitution and don't even care about the Fourth Amendment, and they don't care about trying to get a warrant for shit anymore. She voted against the absurd $800 billion Pentagon budget, which is a good thing. That's better than Elizabeth Warren because she voted yes on that. An observation that myself and many other progressives like Kyle Kulinski and Jordan Sheridan, I believe Cenk Uygur of TYT and other progressives, is that it seems like the entire establishment is getting ready to back Kamala Harris 100%. That should give all progressives pause, because this is the same party establishment that was just caught rigging the primary in 2016 against Bernie Sanders in favor of the corrupt establishment candidate Hillary Clinton. If Bernie's running again, and the establishment is already trying to anoint someone again, you should ask yourself why. The reason why they rigged the primary against Bernie Sanders in 2016 is because they know if he won, he'd immediately come in there and shake shit up. The DNC would not be allowed to take any corporate PAC money, or any corporate money, period, if Bernie Sanders was the nominee. All the failed consultants who've been advising these Democratic candidates throughout the party, not just presidential elections, but congressional races and state races, to move further to the right and abandon progressive priorities, Democratic priorities, all of them who are tied to the corporate cash, which is why they have that position, all of them are gone, they're fucking fired. The establishment politicians who have been taking that corporate cash for decades and doing favors for their donors, they know their days would be numbered. And that's not to mention all the policy positions that Bernie Sanders is looking to get into law. Medicare for all, $15 living wage, union protections for workers, free college, ending the wars. All of that shit gets all the establishment up in a tizzy and their panties in a notch. So in order to keep the system exactly as is, they wanted the embodiment of corporate corruption to pull in Obama by being in office for 8 years and keeping the shit exactly the same. So the fact that all the people who were involved in the fuckery in 2016 seem to be getting behind Kamala Harris is concerning. One thing I should warn people about from the beginning is that a lot of the establishment candidates are going to rely heavily on identity politics through this election cycle. This is a hallmark sign of a corporate Democrat. In order to deflect from legit policy criticisms, or to avoid talking about policy specifics so that they don't get nailed down on any specific policy, corporate Democrats love to use identity politics. Expect her to see her playing up the fact that she's a woman, the fact that she's a black woman, a lot during this campaign. Even the way she announced, she specifically held off her announcement to Martin Luther King Day so that she can get all the praise from the black community. Oh my God, we have a black woman running for president on Martin Luther King Day. So she's trying to milk that shit already. I don't think she has a great chance of winning the nomination anyway. Her fatal mistake in this campaign might end up being trying to run a Hillary Clinton-style campaign of I'm with her and strictly identity politics. Because I don't know if you know, that shit didn't work for Hillary Clinton. Because people are starting to see through that shit and they want policy substance. They want to know exactly what you're going to do as president. Not the platitudes and cliches bullshit. That's something I'll be discussing in detail this election cycle. To some people, the criticisms I mentioned may not seem like a big deal, but right now the base of the party wants a strong progressive unequivocally fighting for the people. If the base of the party sees there's even a slim possibility that you might sell them out and do the bidding of the corporate donors, your campaign is already dead in the water. The Democratic base is tired of getting burned by politicians who say one thing but govern in the exact opposite direction. And look no further than Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and Barack Obama to get your prime examples of that. It seems like it's the neoliberal establishment politicians' one and only skill that they possess. Say a bunch of flowery rhetoric bullshit on the campaign trail, then help all the corporations and your donors run out the back door with all the money. And then when you're out of office, you just go ahead and benefit from that, just like Barack Obama's doing with his $50 million deal that he has with Netflix, his $70 million book deal, going around giving speeches to Wall Street banks for $400,000 an hour. That's the shit that people are tired of. On paper, Kamala Harris is a mixed bag. She has some good things, she has some bad things, but in my opinion, the bad heavily outweighs the good. I'm telling you from now, it's looking like Kamala Harris is the establishment candidate, so in this primary, you could just expect to see her going head-to-head with Bernie Sanders.